Hello and welcome everyone, I'm Patrick, bringing you another Arma 3 flight quick tips. This time we will be going over the new RotorLib advanced flight model. Now the biggest tip I can give you is when you're flying a helicopter, you need to stay one step ahead of it at all times. Unlike airplanes, helicopters do not want to fly. They're being held at gunpoint and being told to do so. A helicopter has absolutely no problem killing you to reach ground again. The point being is when you're flying, you always need to stay a step ahead of the helicopter. When you want to add an input, think to yourself, how is this going to try to kill me this time? And be ready to respond to anything it throws at you. Any input you tell the helicopter to do is going to have an equal response you need to be ready to counter. If you're going to be aggressive on the controls, you need to be ready to receive an aggressive response from the helicopter. Well, let's go ahead and go over some of the general aerodynamic effects we need to be aware of when in helicopter flight. First is translational lift. Translational lift happens when you reach a certain amount of forward speed. It will require less power to generate enough lift to stay in the air. It's going to be a lot easier to climb in altitude when you have translational lift. Now what's more important is to keep in mind of when you lose translational lift. Now in the advanced flight model, it's not going to be as pronounced as in real life, with real helicopters or a full simulation, but when you're transitioning into a hover, you need to be aware that it will require a little bit more collective to stay within a hover. This is going to be important to keep aware of, mostly to avoid vortex ring state, but VRS won't be coming for a few months, so expect me to be covering this again then. Next is ground effect. Ground effect, put into simple terms, is when your downwash is creating almost a cushion of air between you and the ground, which allows for less lift to hold a hover. Now it only happens within roughly 1 rotor diameter of you and the ground, but it can be used to help generate enough lift for a hover if you're having problems keeping in the air otherwise. It can be handy when you're flying at extreme altitudes like mountain ranges, or if your current load weight is too much without the assistance of translational lift. Now last is vortex ring state, but that's going to be something I'm going to be covering in full detail in the future when Bohemia Interactive has taken the time to polish it enough for release within the coming months. However, if you're watching this while it's been released, there's going to be an annotation on the screen where you can check it out. Those are some of the general aerodynamic effects that helicopters have to deal with, and though the advanced flight model doesn't quite get it right as if it was a full simulator or an actual helicopter, they are something I think deserve an understanding of anyway. Now to get ready for the flight model, if you haven't already, I recommend every pilot out there get some time in practicing anti-torque failure recovery and auto-rotation. It's done still in a fairly similar manner as before, but it's going to take some practice to be comfortable with how things have changed. Next is anti-torque control. Now as many of you I'm sure know, helicopters need to counter the torque they produce with their tail rotor. You as a pilot control the lift generated from your tail rotor with your anti-torque pedals. Now it's not going to be as much of a problem when you have forward speed, but in takeoff and landings and hovering, you're going to need to apply some pedal to counter the torque. Now when you're applying your anti-torque input, you should always be as smooth as possible. It's not a good idea to be aggressive on the pedal. Another good tip is to never run out of pedal. Always leave yourself something to work with. When flying, it's not as easy as it sounds to know by feel that you're not overcompensating or undercompensating for torque. So I recommend trying to line up your total velocity vector here with your center crosshair here to know if you're all properly trimmed out. Now let's go ahead and go with the new landing gear. Now there's manual control over the gear up and gear down on select aircraft, as well as being able to control the wheel brake. Taxiing is also now possible with all-wheeled helicopters. To taxi, all you need to do is disable the wheel brake and point your cyclic forward to gain speed and left and right pedal respectively to turn. Now when it comes to rolling landings, I really recommend being under 80 kilometers an hour and make sure to have your wheel brake on throughout the entire landing. If you have your wheel brake off at higher speed rolling landings, it's very possible the helicopter will lose control and roll over. Skids also now function correctly and allow you to skid at a lot more generous speeds. Skids can also land safer at higher speeds than wheels can, as long as you land within a reasonable vertical speed. However, with that said, it's still suggested to stay within that 80 km an hour max speed on rolling landings. That will be the end of this video. In the meantime, feel free to check out my other videos, but until the next one, I'm Patchwork and welcome to the war.